King Charles has backed Canada, telling senior Canadian Senate members of his deep affection for the country.
King tells of deepest affection for Canada. This, to me, is it could be argued that it's an intervention in politics. It comes off the back, of course, of Donald Trump wanting to annex Canada, making them the 51st state. The King has said he's expressed his deepest affection for Canada. So is this an intervention in politics, or am I...
Well, do you know what? I'm not a monarchist, but I do have a fondness for King Charles, because I do think he likes to make these tongue-in-cheek comments that are slightly provocative. And we saw him do it to Liz Truss. He wore that tie which looked like the Greek flag around the Elgin Marbles, and now he's talking about his deepest affection for Canada. I think he's a bit more of a little bit of a less stickler for precedent, and I think he does make it quite clear in his own way his feelings about certain political topics, and I quite like it.
Yeah. The King has had to walk a diplomatic tightrope since Donald Trump launched his trade war on his northern neighbour and called for it to become the 51st state of America.
You said you were considering military force to acquire Panama and Greenland. Are you also considering military force to annex and acquire Canada?
No. Economic force. Because Canada and the United States, that would really be something. You get rid of that artificially drawn line, and you take a look at what that looks like, and it would also be much better for national security. Don't forget, we basically protect Canada.
He believes that Canadians would benefit greatly from becoming the 51st state of the United States of America. And I actually looked into some of the research about the cost of living in Canada, and the cost of living is much higher than it is here in the United States of America. The average cost of a home in Canada is much higher. In Quebec, the highest tax rate for an income of $150,000 or more is 53.3%, more than half of Canadians' incomes they are being taxed on. So the president has made it clear that he believes Canadians would be better served economically, militarily, if they were to become the 51st state of the United States of America.
Shortly after those threats, the monarch posted to Instagram a photo saying that he and Queen Camilla joined with Canadians to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Canadian flag. He went on to say the flag has become internationally recognised as a symbol of a proud, resilient and compassionate country. On a personal level, he said, "It's a symbol that never fails to elicit a sense of pride and admiration, as I recall with the deepest affection my many Canadian visits and friendships." Canadians have been disappointed with the lack of support they've received from Britain since Trump set his eyes on the country. Keir Starmer told reporters there was no divide between him and the US on the issue.
Because we have been taken advantage of like no country has ever been taken advantage of. Thank you very much. And
look, we had a really good discussion, a productive discussion, a good discussion, as a result of which our teams are now going to be working together on an economic deal. Our teams are going to be working together on security in Ukraine. You mentioned Canada. I think you're trying to find a divide between us that doesn't exist. We're the closest of nations, and we had very good discussions today, but we didn't discuss Canada.
Thank you. Please. Go ahead. Go ahead. Yes. Thank you.
He again declined to stand up for Canada in an interview with Fox News.
King Charles obviously is also the head of state in Canada. What do you or does the King think about President Trump's calls for Canada to join America as the 51st state?
Well, let me deal with the invitation, because this is a very special invitation, because it's an invitation to the President from His Majesty the King for a second state visit. That's unprecedented. That's not happened before. That is history in the making, and I'm very pleased to be able to go back to His Majesty and tell him that President Trump has agreed. As for what His Majesty may think of world events, that's not for me to say. His Majesty obviously will express himself in his own way, but it's not for me to express his views.
Starmer told an angry Commons that he didn't have the time to discuss the country with Trump.
Speaker, it's very welcome to hear the Prime Minister acknowledge the contribution of Canada to Ukraine's self-defence and its status as a vital ally for the UK. Last week, the Prime Minister was asked in the US by the press about President Trump's repeated calls for Canada to become a state within the US. The PM answered that he and Trump didn't address that issue, didn't address Canada. Yet, wasn't this meeting a good opportunity to remind President Trump about sovereignty, independence, including that of Canada?
Yeah.
Yes, but it's a serious point. In the time we had available, I was most anxious to discuss the question of security guarantees, and that's why I devoted the vast amount of time I had there. But on the question of Canada, I think we should be absolutely clear. Canada is a vital ally to the United Kingdom, to the Commonwealth, and has played a leading part in relation to Ukraine, not least on the vital training that they have provided. And we should be very proud of what the Canadians have done.
Social media was awash with ridicule of Donald Trump.
My dream has come true. I am now King Trump.
Your Majesty Governor Trudeau, Prime Minister Trudeau from Canada has come to see you.
Greetings, Your Majesty, from the great land of Canada. Your Majesty, I beg of you, please do not impose a 25% tariff on my people.
The threat to Canadian sovereignty appears to have driven a greater appreciation for Britain and the monarchy.
God Save the King could be ringing out in school halls in Canada very soon, as one school district has proposed playing at the end of every school day to some people's bemusement. This will be happening in the Delphine School District in Manitoba, as you'll see there. Now, this used to be a tradition years ago and has died out and people just don't really do it anymore, but they thought, we're going to bring this bad boy back, especially after the conflict with the US lately, so, want to realign with the old big dad, They initially proposed this, there was some kickback, but yesterday at a meeting they said, no, we're going to push on with this, seeking legal advice to make sure everything's tickety-boo, but still, we're going to do it. There is concern about how this will make Indigenous people feel, but with everything that's going on in the world, and again, with the strife with the US, they want to, probably reach out to other countries and realign themselves as countries in Europe are pulling together. So, it's an odd one, but we'll have some syrup and great, it's all good. We'll start playing hockey and stuff.
Canadian identity often defines itself as against America and pro-Britain.
Canada is also a place whose leaders have always had a curiously ambivalent attitude towards their own country's independence, well into the early 20th century, in fact, by which point Canada was already almost entirely self-governing. Independence was still considered a dirty word in some corners of Canadian politics. Canada's greatest Prime Minister, Sir Wilfrid Laurier, even has this infamous quote where he says, "We have found that our Canadian independence is quite compatible with our dependence as a colony." A lot of this has to do with the anti-American way that Canadian patriotism has traditionally been defined. Since the Americans derived their patriotic national identity from a rejection of the British Empire, Canada would derive its patriotic national identity from an embrace of that empire, with anyone who is seen as being too critical of the imperial bonds being denounced as some sort of unpatriotic closet America lover.
Under Keir Starmer, Britain hasn't been so keen to reciprocate Canada's affection. Britain has tried to cozy up to Donald Trump in the hope that it would avoid tariffs that have been applied to other NATO allies, falling back on our so-called special relationship. Yet the US president slapped levies on all steel and aluminium imports, including from Britain.
The PM being incredibly careful what he says about Canada in particular, stressing they're an ally, but also tariffs and Trump's behaviour more broadly. He says that he is disappointed, yes, that the US is bringing in tariffs on steel and aluminium from the UK at 25%, but saying, look, they're taking a pragmatic approach and that's what's needed ultimately to get what they hope will be a trade deal with America. I think we are some way off that. Worth saying that this is a global rollout, the special relationship that we hear so much about. Only a couple of weeks ago, Donald Trump was suggesting that perhaps we might escape them because of that special relationship, but it seems, for the moment at least, that's not happening.